Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to the Debrief. I'm Devin Dwyer. Great to have you with us. Happening right now, U.S.-backed forces are making a final push to kick ISIS out of Syria. We're live from the region. Plus, embattled Virginia Governor Ralph Northam speaking out in a new interview. We have what he's saying. And say it ain't so. We could be possibly 4 days now from another government shutdown. All that and more coming up after these headlines.
The Democratic field for president is heating up this weekend in snowy conditions. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar launched her bid for the presidency of the United States.
I don't have a political machine. I don't come from money. But what I do have is this. I have grit.
Senator Klobuchar on Good Morning America told ABC's George Stephanopoulos why she's running.
What do you bring to the race that no one else is offering, that only you are bringing?
Snow. I bring a background of growing up in the heartland. I bring some grit to the race that comes from being the granddaughter of an iron ore miner and the daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, and someone that has risen to the challenges every time I get a job.
Also in Boston, Senator Elizabeth Warren made her run for the White House official amid a backlash of her claims of Native American ancestry.
We need to take power in Washington away from the wealthy and well-connected and put it back in the hands of the people where it belongs.
Dramatic crash in NASCAR. Driver Jimmy Johnson triggered this wreck you're about to see in Daytona. Right there. Then he walked away with the victory. Johnson's number 48 bumped the leader on the wet track, and the crash eventually took out nearly everyone else in the exhibition race. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
Well, President Trump says this is the week that the curtain will finally fall on ISIS in Syria, and the extremist group, which had been kicked out of Iraq, now has a tiny foothold in that country. U.S.-backed Kurdish forces are launching a final battle right now to eliminate the extremists. And our James Longman is coming to us live now from the region. He's in Erbil, Iraq. James, it's great to see you and have you with us to kick off the show today. Give us the latest. What's happening with that operation to root out ISIS?
Hi, Devin. Yeah, so right now the focus is on a tiny village called Baghouz. It sits on the border between here in Iraq and eastern Syria, right down along the Euphrates River. And we think something in the region of about 500 to 600 ISIS fighters could be in there. I hesitate to give you numbers, though. It's really difficult to know exactly. But they're calling them the last remnants, the fighting few, the remains of the great ISIS caliphate fighting against, as you say, those Kurdish forces, backed up by the US-led coalition with airstrikes and with artillery fire. So it is a long fight. It has been a long fight to get down to this place. If you look at that part of the world, as the Euphrates River winds down into Syria, there is a kind of those villages dot down the riverbank, and one by one those villages have been falling, but one by one the civilians have been fleeing, and that is also a big part of this fight, because not only do these people need to be looked after, but the Kurdish particularly are very, very sensitive to ISIS fighters who are now melting back into the population. So those people are having to be processed. It is not a clear picture at all who's a combatant, who is a civilian, and of course the civilian casualties mount as those airstrikes and those artillery strikes continue. So we're thinking that the clock is ticking to a complete elimination of ISIS-held territory in that formal sense, but getting rid of ISIS for good from this part of the world, that is not a victory that anyone can say is going to happen this week.
Yeah, James, I was going to ask you about that. It's sort of striking that 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, ISIS surged to power in Iraq and Syria. As you said, about 99% of that territory has been retaken. But they're not going away. Help us understand that. Even though the territory may be taken back, they can still pose a terror threat?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's helpful to think of ISIS and its strength in three ways. First is territorially, but then it's in their capacity to launch attacks and how strong those attacks can be. And then it's in the number of troops that they can say are at their command. And in those second two ways, ISIS is still a very powerful threat. They've been able to launch attacks inside formerly liberated areas of both Iraq and Syria. We've even seen US troops casualties of those attacks. And in terms of troop numbers or individuals who consider themselves to be part of ISIS, well, the US State Department itself says something in the region of 20,000 men would call themselves ISIS fighters, or there are 20,000 ISIS fighters somewhere in Iraq and Syria. So this very much is not a threat that is going away. The possibility is, after a US troop withdrawal, I think something in the region of about 2,000 US troops are in Syria at the moment, after they leave, it will be then that those individuals decide to regroup and mount an insurgency. And that is what this country is worried about.
Jameson, you mentioned those U.S. troops, several thousand still there. We've been hearing a lot here in Washington about President Trump's plan to pull them all out. What role are they playing in this final operation to kick ISIS out of Syria?
Well, we think something in the region of 2,000, maybe 3,000 troops are here in Syria. And they're not playing a frontline role, but they're very much in the thick of it in terms of, well, they've been training troops, they've been offering their advice and a consulting basis and providing air support. But they are close to the action. There's an Al Omar, it's called the Al Omar oil field, which is a US base quite close to the front line. And just over the weekend, there was an ISIS attack on that base. 10 ISIS fighters on motorbikes wrapped with suicide belts apparently tried to make their way to that base. So they are very much still in the thick of it. Donald Trump wants them out of there, though, so that may well happen.
Hey, James Longman coming to us live from Erbil, Iraq. James, fantastic reporting. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing much more from you throughout the week. To Virginia now, where embattled Governor Ralph Northam has given his first on-camera interview since the scandal broke just over a week ago of that racist photo in his yearbook. Governor Northam says he is not resigning. In fact, he says he's best positioned to help Virginia heal. He's also explaining how he's learning more about the state's history of slavery. And let's go now to take a little bit of a look at that interview with CBS News. Here's the part that has most people talking this morning.
Yes, I have thought about resigning, but I've also thought about what Virginia needs right now. And I really think that I'm in a position where I can take Virginia to the next level. Just 90 miles from here, in 1619, the first indentured servants from Africa landed on our shores in Old Point Comfort, what we call now Fort Monroe. And while
also known as slavery.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, while we have made a lot of progress in Virginia, slavery has ended. Schools have been desegregated. We have ended the Jim Crow laws, easier access to voting. It is abundantly clear that we still have a lot of work to do.
And Zachary Keese joins us live now from Richmond, the state capital. Zachary, great to see you. You've been on this story from the start. So give us the sense of reaction there at the Capitol to the governor's interview.
Well, I think that the governor said it right there at the end of his comments. We still have a lot of work to do, right? I mean, the idea that somebody who is up against what he is up against and has, I would assume, some folks around him kind of guiding him and trying to help him through this process, the idea that he would refer still to slavery as indentured servants is incredible. And I think that it really touches on this point that he doesn't quite grasp the weight of necessarily what's going on here, right?
It certainly does seem that way. He did just put out a statement, as you know, Zachary, saying that he had been told to refer to them as indentured servants by a historian this year, sort of defending himself, Gayle King correcting him. You know, I was struck by this Washington Post poll, which came out over the weekend. First time we're getting a sense of Virginia residents narrowly divided on whether he should stay or go, but a majority of African-American voters there think he should stay.
Devin, let's keep in mind, the governor is calling this his racial reconciliation tour. He's talking about how he's reading books like Alex Haley's Roots and really gaining a better understanding of the plight and the experience of black people, not only in the state of Virginia, but around the country. This poll that you mentioned, I think it really touches on the complexity of this issue. As you mentioned, folks are split. 47% say he should stay, 47% say he should go. But when you look at the black community, the black voters here, there's actually a spike. It's more about 58%. I had an opportunity to talk to a woman yesterday who kind of laid these issues out for me. She said for her, a middle-aged black woman who identifies as a lesbian, she says, hey, it's really important for me that Northam stays. First of all, part of the experience in this country as it relates to black people is about educating and forgiving white people. That is an experience, that is an exercise that most people in this community can relate to. But she said by pushing him out, we don't actually address the issues. It doesn't actually get to the underlying issues of systematic racism in our society. And so hopefully if he's there, we can address these issues and we can kind of hold his hand to the fire to see some of these changes happen.
Yeah, and complicating all of this, of course, is the number of scandals beneath Northam, not least of which is surrounding the Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, who I understand just gave an interview as well. He faces 2 sexual assault allegations now. Give us the latest on the talk about impeachment for Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, Zachary. We understood that it was maybe supposed to start today, but there's been some sort of effort to delay that?
Yeah, so a delegate out of Northern Virginia, Patrick Hope, made the call on Friday, had a press conference, and essentially said if Fairfax does not resign by Monday, that he will introduce these proceedings to move forward with an impeachment. It would have happened just over my left shoulder here in the House. But the interesting thing here, and this was the headline all weekend, this is something that we went with and many others did too. We never heard from anybody else. We never heard anybody double down and co-sign on those calls for impeachment. We have heard from the who's who, certainly in the Democratic Party and Republican Party, for Fairfax to resign. But impeachment was an entirely different thing. And now today, we're hearing from that delegate again. He put out a note this morning that said essentially he drafted some language, he shared it with his colleagues, and came to the consensus that there need to be more conversations as it relates to how to move forward with an impeachment. As you mentioned, the scandals around here and how we got here, right? It was about this blackface and about a number of different people in leadership connected to this blackface. And I think that kind of the elephant in the room is that the idea that a younger black man could be pushed out without due process. Again, he is up against serious charges that should not be minimized in any way. The racial stuff may be more of a racial or moral issue, but the idea, the optics of this guy getting pushed out before a full investigation, I think rubs some people certainly around here the wrong way.
It's going to be another tumultuous week in Virginia. Zachary Quiche will be there the whole way. Zachary, great to chat with you as always. Thanks so much. To the nation's capital now here, and the countdown to yet another possible government shutdown. Funding runs out just 4 days from now, and over the weekend, bipartisan talks seem to take a turn for the worse. Our Karen Travers is at the White House. She's been tracking the discussions on border security that were supposed to bring this all to an end. Karen, it seemed like we were closing in on a deal over border barriers, and now this morning we're talking about detention beds. What's going on?
Yeah, a new wrinkle to these negotiations, Devin. There was a lot of optimism at the end of last week that the bipartisan negotiators were close to an agreement that they thought the president and the White House could sign on to that would put aside money for border security. Now, the question, of course, is what do you call it? A wall or fencing or physical barrier? But they were really optimistic that they were getting close. Now, the talks seem to be stalled because there's this new element that's a part of the conversation. Democrats are pushing for a limit on the number of detention beds, essentially trying to focus the administration or force them to focus on who it is that is being arrested, undocumented immigrants, who is being detained, to try and get the focus to be on criminals and limit the number of options that the government would have and that officials would have. So this is perhaps a big hurdle. We're going to wait and see how this plays out over the course of today and tomorrow. But I think it is notable. We were expecting some potential announcement today of a compromise, and that doesn't look like it's going to happen. That clock is ticking. The deadline is the end of the day Friday, and of course another shutdown is very possible.
Yeah, and the president, meanwhile, is turning into campaign mode. He's headed to the southern border again tonight, Karen, El Paso, Texas. Interesting thing there, El Paso is not exactly the best case example for why we would need a border wall, right?
Right, based on the fact checks that we've been doing. Last week in the State of the Union, the president highlighted El Paso, Texas as a city that he said had very high rates of violent crime. And the president said that crime dropped after a wall, physical barrier, was built there. Well, this, of course, is very ripe for a fact check. And when you drill down on the government numbers, and this was driven by the local newspaper down there, the El Paso Times, found that actually the crime rate started to drop before the wall was built. So you can't say it's because of the wall that El Paso is now a safer city. The president did say that last week in the State of the Union. I think we will certainly see him emphasizing that again tonight at this rally in El Paso.
And the former congressman from that city, El Paso, Beto O'Rourke, is also going to be in the headlines. We know he's holding some rallies, so it will certainly be fascinating to watch that, Karen. Finally, just got to kick with you since it's tax season. I don't know about you. I have not yet started my taxes, but many people are. The IRS out over the weekend said that they have started to analyze the early returns coming in. Many people finding their refunds this year are a lot lower than expected with that presidential tax cut.
Yeah, and this was big legislation that the president signed at the end of 2017. He has certainly talked about the significance of this and how this is going to help average Americans. And now we're finding that tax refunds that first week of filing are down 8% compared to the average from last year. There are also millions of Americans, Devin, who are finding out that they owe the government money. This is being chalked up to a change in how the deductions work under this new tax bill. But this is certainly something that I think you'll see Democrats jump on, because the president likes to point to this as a sign that he is doing very good things for the average American, especially when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, busy tax season ahead. Karen Travers, a busy week ahead at the White House. Great to see you, Karen. Thanks so much. Headed out to Colorado now, where Denver public school teachers today have launched their first strike in 25 years. They're joining a wave of teacher protests across the country in recent months. Of course, we saw them in Los Angeles, Kansas, Virginia. Teachers demanding higher pay, more funding for schools. Our Micah Smith with ABC affiliate KMGH in Denver is outside tracking the protest today. Micah, it's great to see you. So bring us inside the protest. What are these teachers asking for today?
Well, Devin, teachers want better pay here in Denver. They've been negotiating with Denver Public Schools for the past 15 months. And from the beginning, they've said they want $28.5 million toward teachers' salaries. During their last negotiation session with Denver Public Schools, the school district offered $25 million. But teachers here said, too little, too late, and they decided to strike today.
It's a good, and as I understand, their pay, $43,000 average there in Denver, well below the $58,000 national average for public school teachers. You've been talking to a lot of parents, a lot of teachers out there. What's your big takeaway from this moment in the public school protest out there in Denver?
Well, Devin, my biggest takeaway is after talking with teachers, parents, students, and administrators, they all agree that teachers deserve better pay. But where they disagree is how that should be implemented and what exactly that looks like. I think once both sides of the argument start to give a little wiggle room at the negotiation table, we'll start to see more action toward ending this strike.
All right, great to see you. Micah Smith with ABC affiliate KMGH in Denver, out there on the Denver teacher protest today, first time in 25 years, thanks to her. Meanwhile, down in Venezuela, a standoff that we have been following with President Nicolas Maduro, embattled, dug in, faced by opposition leader Juan Guaido. Humanitarian crisis enveloping over the weekend as well. Our Cody Weddle has been tracking the story from the start. He's in Caracas, joins us live. Cody, great to see you. Give us the latest on this humanitarian aid situation. U.S. Forces had prepared to bring in food and supplies across the Colombian border, but then we saw those pretty incredible pictures, the Maduro regime blocking the only highway from Colombia into Venezuela with those shipping containers. What's the word on the street there about that aid?
Well, we got to look to see what that aid was over the weekend, and it consists of several tons of rice and corn flour, the Venezuelan staples here used to make arepas, the corn cakes here that people eat so commonly here. So people here on the streets are seeing that. They're seeing that online. And we saw Nicolás Maduro over the weekend. He was on state TV, and he had to give an explanation for why he's not allowing this aid into the country, for a country that continues to suffer the effects of its worst ever humanitarian crisis. And he basically said Venezuela is not a beggar, that Venezuela is not looking for a handout. But there was an embarrassing moment in that press conference for Maduro when the lights went out during the middle of the press conference. So embarrassing for him because this country's infrastructure here is in shambles. The electricity, running water, there are common blackouts here have become common. So that manifests itself during Nicolás Maduro's address. Over the weekend, we continue to see these dueling narratives between Nicolás Maduro and Juan Guaidó. Nicolás Maduro was on the Venezuelan coast carrying out military exercises, saying he is preparing for a military intervention here. On the other hand, we saw Juan Guaidó continuing to push for the armed forces here to accept that humanitarian aid. And today there is revealing reporting from Bloomberg saying that Nicolás Maduro is considering a plan B, at least internally, and looking at other countries where he could go if it appeared that his government was on its way out here. And all of this is ahead of more protests scheduled here for tomorrow.
Yeah, another major rally on the way. But I have to ask you, Cody, we've been talking to you here on ABC News Live for the past couple of weeks. And as you've been describing the humanitarian crisis, I'm wondering how you're holding up. How are you able to find a good meal? What's the situation like for you as a journalist on the ground there in those conditions?
Well, thankfully, the people who have access to dollars here can afford food. There is food for people who have the money. But for the people, Venezuelans who are earning $6 roughly a month, they can go to the pharmacy, they can go to the supermarket, and one little item can cost basically their whole month's salary. So for me, I'm fine because I have connections. I know where I can find what I need. But for Venezuelans, they just can't afford it.
Yeah, really tough scene down there. Cody Weddle, we know you'll be on the case all the way. Great to have you with us again today, Cody. We'll be in touch. Thanks so much. Up to New York City now on a lighter note, where the Westminster Dog Show is in its 143rd year, where the dogs are strutting on the down the convention hall there, where our Will Reeve has been tracking them today. 2,800 contestants. Here's Will Reeve's report. Take a look.
We are at the Westminster Kennel Club. I am here with Chris and my friend Eli here, getting ready for the big day, big show coming up. Chris, what's happening with Eli here? What are we doing?
He's getting his last show preparations before he goes in the ring. So right now we're doing a little bit of scissoring. But yeah, we're getting close to showtime.
Getting close to showtime. Eli looks very relaxed. Which which field is Eli competing in here?
Well, first he's going to compete against the other standard poodles, which is what he is, a standard poodle. And then if he wins best of breed, he'll go and show in the group. If he wins that, he'll be in for best in show.
All right, well, Chris, Eli, best of luck. You stay groomed up, stay calm. It's all going to be good. He's not even paying attention to me, so let's take a little walk here. We are in the midst of where all the dogs and their handlers are. It's pretty chaotic, but there seems to be a method to the madness, and I'm just going to take you along on a walk here and see what we find. There are dogs of like every different kind of dog you've ever seen. 3,200 plus dogs entered in this year's competition, the 143rd annual Westminster. Lots of dogs that I've never seen before, I don't really recognize, but they're all the very best of their breed. They're all being groomed here. This looks really quite enjoyable. That's basically a miniature version of Eli, who we just saw down the way there. Hundreds of people here. The big show at night is at Madison Square Garden. We are actually on the west side of Manhattan, right on the Hudson River on Pier 92. It's just a bigger space because the event has grown and grown over the years. There's so many more people and so many more dogs. It's easier to fit them. And as you can see, we jam them all in here. We're getting into the mini dogs over here. This guy, I'm not allowed to touch them because they're getting ready for their show. What sort of dog is this?
Chow Chow.
That is a Chow Chow, as you know. That's a good looking dog. He looks very fluffy, but I'm gonna let you get ready for your big day. That's how we all aspire to be. Have a little fan, blowing our hair, getting ready for our big performance out on the biggest stage of them all. For dogs, Really, it's a fun experience here. It's a lot of different people from all over the country, all over the world. They come, they're celebrating the very best of the best in their breeds. This is their livelihood. It just keeps going and going all the way at the other end. I don't even have time to get you there. They're actually starting to judge the dogs. But we'll be here all day giving you whatever we can at the Westminster Kennel Club. Lots of fun, lots of exciting dog stuff going on. If you're a dog lover, if you're in Manhattan, try to get down here. I can't touch them, I can't take any of them, but this is kind of heaven for a dog lover like me.
And our thanks to Will Reeve for that, a fun assignment for him. Finally today, because it's winter and because who doesn't love polar bears? We've got to tell you about a story out of northern Russia where there's been an invasion there of more than 50 polar bears in a town. A state of emergency has been declared. It turns out it's a byproduct of global warming. Scientists saying the thinning sea ice in that area have forced many of the animals to move inland, threatening residents. Even reports of kindergartens putting up fences around the schools to get those polar bears away. These are not the Russian polar bears. We're still checking on images coming in, but of course, it's winter and polar bears are cute, so there you go. I'm Devin Dwyer here in Washington. Great to have you with us today on The Debrief. But be sure to join me later this afternoon for our political show, The Briefing Room, 3:30 Eastern Time here on ABC News Live. And of course, coming up later tonight, 8 p.m., World News Tonight with David Muir. And please, as always, download the ABC News app. It's a great resource to have in your pocket. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Debrief.